Anne here, and this is More Than a Love Interest, the show where we talk about the arcs of female characters in film. Today, I am very excited to get us started on a series about my favorite Avenger, the Black Widow. While we wait for the Black Widow movie to someday come out, I thought we could all enjoy talking about Nat's movies over the years. Her initial appearance was in Iron Man 2, and it is a little difficult to talk about her character arc because she is in disguise from our protagonist for most of the film. So we don't see much from her point of view. I think it's still a pretty good introduction to her, but I'll be breaking from my usual format to talk about her role as a spy, her relationship with Pepper, and how she fits into Tony's story. Let's get started. In the comics, Natasha Romanoff was introduced in the 60s in an Iron Man comic with the intent of tricking Tony Stark out of something or other. It's not important. So on paper, she is doing that here. But what exactly is Natasha's role in this movie? Because it seems like they're setting her up for a few tropes that never really come into fruition. Is she here as a love interest to Tony? A rival to Pepper? Well, sort of. But then she and Pepper get along extremely well by the midpoint, while her relationship with Tony never gets off the ground. Is she a suspicious newcomer sent to distract and or spy on Tony?
Now this, on the other hand, is Agent Romanoff's assessment of you.
It turns out yes, though I don't think this is planted very well during the first half of the movie, but being a kind of honey trap is the strongest through line she seems to have. She presents herself very attractively. She has boudoir photos readily available to a quick search. She humors and even encourages Tony in a way that Pepper does not.
I'll do whatever I wanted to do, with whoever I wanted to do it.
So we, the audience, are more likely to consider her a potential homewrecker than question her loyalties. Until midway through the film when we learn that she is working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and was sent to be a plant there for Fury. This is foreshadowed by this woman, there to serve Tony a subpoena, and she clearly knew the best way to get close to him. Natasha adopts the same method, and both women are successful. To an extent, Tony acts suspicious of Natalie,
Natalie Rushman.
but not in a way that signals to the audience that he is skeptical of her motives. It's unclear what his deal is, and we don't see her do anything untoward. She isn't snooping through records or anything. When we first meet Nat, Tony is immediately intrigued by her. Now, he naturally deflects this, but I would say there's a good argument for how he is attempting to assess her here and finds her unreadable. He says as much later on in the scene.
I need your impression.
You have quiet reserve. I don't know, you have an old soul.
I meant your fingerprint.
Pepper assumes his interest is more, straightforward.
She is from legal, and she is potentially a very expensive sexual harassment lawsuit if you keep...
But I think Tony is generally not very trusting of the people around him, and also can read them fairly well. Pepper and Rhodey may handle him, but he is very good at pushing people's buttons, which indicates a level of emotional intelligence, and he is getting nothing from Natasha. So she plays very well into the idea of a honey trap. She acts and dresses to her best advantage to catch his eye, which is part of being a spy. She is aware of how to get close to Tony, and there's a reason Hawkeye wasn't sent instead. She finds an excuse to see him in an irregular capacity, in a gym instead of an office, and she goes along with whatever he suggests. When Happy takes a jab at her, she reacts.
Your opponent.
Oh my God!
But not as over the top as she could have, not as much as we see she is capable of later in the film. She did this to get Tony's attention and curiosity, and it works. He may have his suspicions, but he arranges for her to be nearby so he can keep an eye on her, which plays into her plan. For the next several scenes, she is a very good assistant. She ensures Tony gets whatever table he wants. She gets Happy for Pepper. She helps Pepper deal with the media and put out fires while trying to help Tony as well. Basically, she handles the assistant role perfectly. Then we find out she isn't an assistant.
You're fired.
That's not up to you.
She comes out after Tony's party dressed in her tack suit and is very chummy with Director Fury. Side note, one thing I really love is the hints to their relationship in these movies. He looks so comfortable with her here, and clearly trusts her judgment implicitly, since she is there to evaluate Tony. Anyway, Tony is surprised to find out who she was working for. Well, I think there is very little to make us think she was working for anyone. Why didn't they play up her Russian past? Like hinting that she might be working with Vanko. Presumably they chose to introduce her in this movie alongside Whiplash because they're both Russian. But how much more impactful would this moment have been if the audience had thought she was working for him? Instead, we see her do nothing unexplained at all. And Tony may be skeptical of her, but we never have any real indication as to why, which would have been a good approach for the movie to take. Well, she reveals that she is working for Fury, and the next we see her, she is working for Pepper. Tony finally discovers something to get a reaction out of her, that she is undercover, doesn't want anyone to know, and she snaps at him.
It means you can either drive yourself home or I can have you collected.
Otherwise, she works very well with Pepper, which we'll go into further in the next section. Finally, we get this awesome scene. We had 2 scenes foreshadowing this. One I already mentioned and is pretty obvious, but there is a much more subtle one. At Tony's party, when he falls through the roof, look at her reaction. Pretty different from Pepper's, I'd say. So it does not exactly come out of nowhere that she just tears through everyone in her way. We get to see some moves and weapons that we'll see again in the future, most notably this, and this, and it's fun to see those set up as part of her repertoire. Now, this movie is not a spy movie. It's much more about Tony and his self-destructive behavior, and learning to let people help him.
Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to exit the donut.
But as a result, all of the spy things are kind of on the back burner. And I think they could have used Natasha, and even Vanko, better if they leaned more into that genre. Like, this is a great scene, and definitely wouldn't be amiss in a Bourne movie, or whatever, but that kind of gets abandoned afterward, and could have made the movie work better if it had been continued. This is evident in the fact that the second Captain America movie does just that, and is remembered much more fondly. It also gave Nat more of a chance to shine than many of her other appearances. So this is a good introduction to her. It establishes her in the franchise and sets up her abilities, and gives a surprisingly good indication of her personality, considering she's undercover for half of the film. But it could have done better, so let's move on to the things that it does especially well. First of all, let's start with something that the MCU does not generally do that well. Develop female characters and not treat them as interchangeable. But we don't need to talk about that here because Pepper and Nat have a relationship that builds organically throughout the film. When Nat first shows up, Pepper dismisses her as another pretty woman trying to take advantage of Tony. She isn't jealous, and we do know that Pepper can be petty about that kind of thing.
Well, she did quite a spread on Tony last year.
And she wrote a story as well.
It was very impressive.
That was good.
But just tries to deter Tony from engaging in another form of acting out.
I want one.
No.
Later, in Monte Carlo, Pepper is not thrilled to see Nat there, but readily accepts her help when Tony is in danger.
Absolutely, I understand. How can I help you?
Where's Happy?
He's waiting outside.
Okay, get him. I need Happy.
Right away.
Nat remains a consummate professional, and perhaps that makes Pepper feel better about her. Until the party. Tony's actions ratchet up a notch, perhaps at Nat's suggestion.
I'll do whatever I wanted to do. With whoever I wanted to do it.
Pepper tries to handle things and is frustrated by Tony's reaction. She takes this out on Nat, berating her.
Miss Potts? Oh, don't you Miss Potts me. I'm on to you. You know.
But then the men fighting interrupt before this conflict can play out. Nat leaves and apparently shows up for work the next day to assist Pepper. Tony is surprised to see that Nat is arranging things for the new CEO, but it's clear that Pepper now trusts her and is appreciative of her. The two of them at the expo is a particular treat, especially as we cut to them in the crowd, clearly disapproving of Hammer and his antics. So we see that they are on the same page by the visuals, and that's pretty fun. But it is especially true after all hell breaks loose and they go to question Hammer. They are a team, and Nat defers to Pepper until Hammer is especially uncooperative.
Get these bitches out of here.
And you tell me who's behind this. Who's behind this?
Then she drops her cover to go take care of business. One of the great things about the climax of this film is that it cuts between our 4 main characters, each handling things differently but within their abilities. Rhodey gives Tony tactical advice while his suit is being controlled, and then they work as a team when he's freed. Pepper deals with Hammer and the more grounded threat, finding out what she can and informing law enforcement of the best way to get everyone out of there. She is every bit the CEO of Stark Industries, dealing competently with a fiasco at the Stark Expo. And Nat helps Pepper get the ball rolling, then breaks into Hammer's headquarters, and then into Vanko's tech system. She frees Rhodey's suit from the program and is basically the mission control for everyone during the rest of the climax.
Reboot complete. You got your best friend back.
And I think that's a great use of her character, and all of the characters, because it really highlights their strengths. But I especially enjoy the way Pepper and Nat play off of each other, and how Nat helps Tony and Pepper reach an understanding at the end.
Save it for the honeymoon. You got incoming, Tony.
It's not often that Nat has a strong relationship with another female character, and I am especially fond of it here in her first appearance. It develops both her and Pepper in a way that the other movies don't really do again, so is honestly a big part of why I rewatch it. Alright, let's keep talking about the women in this film, but specifically how they are framed. Because there are a lot of pretty women in this film. Women whose main role is being pretty, I mean. We have the dancers, we have women in the crowd, we have women at the party, we have the process server, we have the reporter from the last movie, we have Nat, and then we have Pepper, who is in contrast to all of them. Not to say she isn't pretty, of course, but there isn't anything about the framing or the narrative to emphasize that fact. So what I find interesting is how absent the male gaze is in a film in which Tony Stark, at this point a man known for his womanizing, is our protagonist. Even his unrequited love interest, whom he finally ends up with at the close of the movie, has no shots in which she is portrayed sexily.
I need you to wear a surgical mask until you're feeling better.
The women dancers don't get especially lurid shots. The process server is just standing there. The ladies at the party make us more worried about their safety than anything else. We don't linger on Nat's photos. We don't get any panning up of women's legs, or are even asked to note that Nat is wearing a skimpy leopard print dress to the party. And there's one scene in particular I really want to talk about here because of how it is framed. It's this one, where Nat changes into her Black Widow suit in the car. First of all, the sexy lady our protagonist has been ogling is changing clothes, which most movies would have made sure said protagonist was at least present for. But Tony is nowhere to be found in this moment. Secondly, this may actually be a comics reference. This is in Black Widow, The Name of the Rose, when Black Widow was just picked up by Bucky Cap and Wolverine and has to change in the back seat. The James in question is Bucky, and they are kind of a thing in the comics. Anyway, I don't know if this is intentionally a reference to that, since they came out around the same time, but I thought you might enjoy the comparison. Finally, and most importantly, where is the camera directing our attention? Because we would expect it to be directed at Nat, but it's not. It's at Happy, who gets distracted and promptly reprimanded for ogling.
Watch the road.
And I really can't think of another movie where not only are we, the audience, not invited to look, but we are explicitly told that we should not be viewing the scene as an invitation. The shots of Nat, while she is undercover, do emphasize the fact that she is a beautiful woman, but never really in an objectifying way. It's more to show how she is setting herself off to catch Tony's attention, and we know why she would want to do that. Once she is no longer undercover, though, she is framed no differently from any other superhero, which is honestly so refreshing I'm a little shocked. Because I expected to come to this movie and talk about this scene as like, why did we have to see her change in the car? What was the point of that? And it seems like the point is not to objectify her.
I said stay in the car.
What are you wearing?
So while this movie is not perfect, I think its representation of women is really top-notch, even just from the visuals. The male gaze, at least in its objectifying form, is not only absent, but being refuted. I can't say how intentional that is. The fact that it reflects Tony's journey from womanizer toward faithful husband and father in a few years, and that this represents how he is learning not to consider women as objects, but I really enjoy watching it through, that lens. In Tales of Suspense number 32, where Madame Natasha initially appeared, her role was distracting Tony by taking him on a date, then playing the damsel for Tony to rescue in order to give her partner in crime time to escape, and ending with Tony pitying her poor commie soul. Not to criticize a story that came out 57 years ago, but it pretty much fits exactly what you'd expect from a spy called the Black Widow. And I would say that the roles of female spies did not change very much in the interceding years, tending to stick to the same tropes of being sexy and probably dying, especially in Bond movies. In this movie, however, they took that idea in a new direction that was not reductive and made her really shine as a spy and her own character. Her codename doesn't really come up at all and is not relevant to her role here. She isn't there to entrap anyone. Instead, the fact that her femininity is how she gets close to Tony is treated more as an indictment of him than of her, as is Happy's continual underestimation of her. The part she plays in the final scenes doesn't depend on her being female, just on her being a confident and capable spy. So, is Nat more than a love interest? Yes, definitely. I mean, whether she is a love interest at all is up for debate, but I'm willing to argue that she is not wholly defined by Tony in a story that is extremely Tony-centric. We see her relationship with Fury and watch one develop with Pepper, both of which go against Tony. So it's a great introduction to a multifaceted character.
I want you to meet Agent Romanoff.
Alright, let's close this with a book recommendation. For this series, I'm going to recommend my favorite comic books with her in them, in mostly chronological order. So I'm starting with Black Widow, Itsy Bitsy Spider, which features Yelena Belova, and an interesting rivalry for the name of Black Widow. Thank you for listening to me talk about the first appearance of my favorite MCU character. Next time, we'll talk about her becoming an Avenger. Please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, all the things so you don't miss it. See you then.